Back to the pulse, all things people, power, and politics. And tonight we're really focusing on the people and the power. After 4 people have been charged in connection to that fatal explosion at the Troy Medical Facility, the Oxford Center. Today we learned how investigators believe it happened, and it is troubling. Joining us, James Harrington. He represents the victim's family. Kim Harden, your daughter was treated at the Oxford Center in Brighton, in that location. Of course, we have the Troy mayor here, Ethan Baker, and we are glad you're with us because I think you all offer very unique perspectives to this. But we must begin, though, with this family, because so much came out today in court, and we will get to that. I don't know if that could help the family. How are they feeling right now?
The family is absolutely devastated, Taryn. There is a hole in this family that can never be fixed. It can never be filled. They can never be made whole. There's a 3-year-old little brother who's confused and wondering where his brother is. And even with what we saw today in court, with the justice that the Attorney General's office is going for, with the justice that we're going for, and when we win the case, we can't deliver Thomas back into the arms of the parents.
Do the charges help?
Well, the charges do, because that's a form of justice, and that represents justice. And the charges that have been filed are very, very serious charges. And some of the stuff we heard in court today is incredibly concerning. The flight risk of Tammy is incredible. I mean, with the foreign currency that she had, and
visa, Chinese visa,
the Chinese visa,
stashing money, or her husband a forensic account. They feared that because it was much of a cash business, that might have something to do with that.
Running from the police, wiping the laptop clean. This is nothing but a group of psychopaths running mad scientist type of projects on human beings.
It is troubling. We're going to get to even more of the details in a moment, but Kim, you have had firsthand experience with Tammy Peterson. She has come after you when you've had concerns about how your daughter was treated at the facility, a child who suffers from severe autism, and you had to deal with that. I mean, what was that like for you?
It was extremely hard because my daughter wasn't able to come home and say, "Hey, Mom, I'm being locked in a room. They're not giving me food or water."
Right. But she tried to cover it up.
She tried to cover it up. I would call and ask to see videos. They put out to the public that I've seen. They've logged several videos that I've watched. I watched 2 videos. My daughter was there for over a year. I watched 2 videos.
But she came after you legally. When you came forward and said, had you had questions, you reported things, she bullied you and harassed you, and that came out in court today. That's her MO.
Absolutely. She sent a lawyer after us to silence us, for me to stop talking, basically a gag order. Stop talking, stop putting stuff on social media. None of this stuff ever happened. And I had to get my own lawyer at that time.
Luckily, your case moved forward, and we have covered this with the case of Casey Coden-Diskin, who was convicted of fraudulently representing a BCBA therapist, and she got 8 years in prison just recently. When you saw this happen, what was your reaction with this little boy?
I cried all day. We knew something like this would happen. Not to this extent. I mean, my heart is broken for this family. And I can't even imagine, like, a little brother not understanding that his sibling is not going to return, having 3 kids of my own. We all are grieving with this mother.
And there was a lot of parents that certainly banned against the Oxford Center. But, you know, Ethan, when you hear about this, though, a city's perspective, we know firefighters are still dealing with this right now to this day because it was so traumatic for them. What do you believe, in the perspective of the city, that could have been done differently so something like this couldn't happen? Or what are your thoughts on this?
Sure. Let me talk about that first. To the Cooper family, poor little Thomas and his parents. I'm a parent myself. My wife, the minute I heard about this at the end of January, we were in shock. We were devastated from a horribly deep, dark place. So my love and the city of Troy's love, as best we can, to their family.
Thank you.
And you brought up the firefighters, Taryn, and the first responders. Certainly they're dealing with something very different than what your clients are dealing with, but we've provided immediate care for them and anything they need, because that trauma can continue to affect those first responders as well. So
I mean, we learned about a little boy that was basically, there was an explosion triggered by a lack of grounding wire. That came out today. That was what triggered, what triggered the actual spark that caused the explosion, and he suffered to death, sadly, by those flames. And the mother had to watch something like that. Is Is there any way, on behalf of the city, to be able to regulate that? Because right now we know the state doesn't.
Which is a shock to me, and I know our state representative, Sharon McDonald, has been like a dog with a bone, like you, Taryn, very involved in this and doing everything she can from that early stage at the House of Representatives in Michigan to do something. I know others are as well. You know, I'm not sure it's a city-specific function, I'll be quite frank. We have a lot of powers as a home rule city, but certain things are best left to the state or even the federal government in certain cases. We'll certainly cooperate and work with our state representatives and legislator to do what we can, because obviously the enforcement comes back to the city of Troy and our police department, who I commend for their amazing detective work and hard work they've done in this process as well.
We talked about this. It really did move quickly, 6 weeks to be able to get this, but it shows there must have been some substantial evidence. And we're going to get to that in a moment. But first, talking about State Senator Stephanie Chang, there might be some changes coming. She issued this statement today saying that she remains saddened and horrified by Thomas Cooper's tragic death, and because she is a mother of a 5- and a 9-year-old and can't imagine the pain and horror. But also, she says state law doesn't require Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, that's Laura, to regulate or license hyperbaric chamber facilities. And MIOSHA also doesn't have any regulations regarding these machines. She says that her legislative colleagues, they are all exploring possible solutions to make sure this tragedy never happens again. Does this need to happen? Do we need regulations? I mean, we know from court today that allegedly her manager was rolling back the hours, the cycles, so they would not indicate the machines needed to be maintained, which meant this was a ticking time bomb.
Taryn, we heard today that they rolled back not just a couple hours, that they rolled back over 20,000 hours. That took this back to almost 2021, when the expiration of that machine was to be taken out, and they would have had to buy another one. So that in the interest of money and the interest of profits, they rolled it back so they didn't have to buy something and be safe. And this is all profit driven. This is profits over people.
And this is a cash business, but even at Oxford Center, when you were dealing with your daughter with autism, they want that cash. They
want
push
it.
for it.
They want it. They tried to push HBOT on me, and when I said no to it, it was a totally different person that I was dealing with.
And of course, we know it has some results for some people, not scientifically proven, but yet, when you are promoting something that is going to do something and you're not regulating it and maintaining it, that's troubling, Ethan.
Oh, to think that that was going on in my city is mortifying, honestly. And to learn today that it was rolled back to pre-2022.
You're right.
I mean, and that's appalling. And to your point, you know, the anecdotal work of the good work that potentially can be done. You hear a lot about it. It is out there, and you know parents will do anything to help their kids. I would do anything to help my kids. What's interesting to me is, you know, there aren't charges about the sales tactics. There wasn't anything related to that. This is strictly, it was very specific today. But you've talked about the greed, you've talked about some of the sales tactics. Those also need to be looked at from a whole different standpoint, and maybe now's not the time, but there are dirty salespeople all over this state and country that also need to have some of these things addressed, because people are vulnerable when they're trying to care for their children. And we do a lot to protect seniors. We also need to protect parents who will do whatever they can for their kids.
James, what does this do for your case? I mean, these are pretty strong charges.
Sure. So the criminal track is going to go through, and they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the elements for second-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter. And what really is going to be helpful to us is when we get a hold of the state's investigation, their root cause analysis as to the failures, because we're looking at a more expansive view. So we have the AG who's targeting these 4 defendants, but we're looking at the whole picture. We have to be able to see the machine. We have to be able to see that if it had all the required safety features, shutoffs, those type of things. So our view is going to be a little bit more expansive, but fact gathering right now is the most important for our case, and as well as the prosecutors.
Yeah, and to think that these people were unlicensed as well. That's not just about the machines. It's the people that are who are running these machines. And understaffed, there's supposed to be a therapist per machine. I mean, it seems like there are so many layers, and then it was at the expense of these people, these patients, these children. And yet in court, it did seem like it was, I mean, of course, they're going to say not guilty. That we know that happens in court, but it really didn't seem like there was a lot of remorse shown today.
No, they were very deadpan. They were very, straightforward. But this is just almost a a little bit of a preview of the evidence to come is the court has set the probable cause hearing and the preliminary exam. That's where more evidence is going to come out. And just because the charges came when they did, that doesn't mean the investigation stops. I mean, this is important, Taryn, because this is a relatively quick charging given the technical aspect of it. But what that says to me is that they got so much evidence to support their case so quickly that they said, we're good. We can bring charges right now. We're good. And that doesn't mean that they stop gathering additional evidence. So I think this evidence is going to mount, and I think it's going to be very, very difficult for these defendants to get out of this.
And I do want to point out very quickly, she was also being investigated for fraud before this. They had to put that case aside, and that was connected to the case that we entered with the Oxford Center location in Brighton. So more to come. They have huge bonds right now. We'll see where it goes, but we appreciate you here, and we'll see what happens at the end of March. So we are keeping this conversation, though, going with the doctor who uses this treatment for patients. We'll have that next on The Pulse. What it does, the safety measures that are supposed to be in place, and what should happen next. We'll be back. Welcome back to The Pulse.